Food. It is the very first gift God gave to people at creation. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." God has provided. There is enough food in the world to feed everyone, and yet today, over 800 million people are facing hunger. Stop and think about that number. Around the world, more than double the population of Canada lives without the security of knowing that when they feel the pang of hunger at the end of the day, they will have enough food to nourish their bodies. Millions who worry that food will run out next week, next month, and do not know how they will fill their families' plates. People living without enough access to God's gift of food and nutrition to live healthy and active lives. That number is rising because of conflict, because of climate change, and now because of the effect of COVID-19. Millions of people, many of whom farm 2 small plots of land on worn-out soils, are reaching crisis levels that means selling assets, eating less nutritious food, skipping meals, or moving away from their home communities in order to secure food. Canadian Foodgrains Bank is a Christian response to hunger, a partnership of churches and church-based organizations working together to end global hunger. The vision of a world without hunger is an ambitious vision that reflects the new heavens and earth, where there will be no more hunger, no more thirst, and no more scorching heat. But is it really possible to do anything meaningful about over 800 million people facing hunger in the world today? I believe there is. I take inspiration from a familiar story in today's reading from John chapter 6, and I hope you'll be inspired too. In this story, Jesus and the disciples were faced with an overwhelming number of hungry people. Jesus turns to the disciples and asks a surprising question to test them. Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? Mark records Jesus as saying, "You give them something to eat." Imagine how it would feel if Jesus showed up here and said to you, to your congregation, "You give them something to eat." Where shall we buy bread for these 800 million people to eat? We would know that it would be impossible to do. The disciples too were overwhelmed by the question. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. But then they showed God what they had, and that's where the miracle happened. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" How far will what you have go among so many? What difference can you make to over 800 million people? The miracles happen when we put the resources we have in God's hands and then follow instructions. Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 people were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. 5,000 people fed from 5 barley loaves and 2 fish with food left over. Canadian Foodgrains Bank was started in 1983 by farmers in the prairies, moved by the news stories of hunger crisis in other parts of the world. They took what they had, offered it to God, and started shipping grain to places where it was needed. They then petitioned the government and secured an agreement for the Government of Canada to match every dollar worth of grain provided by farmers with $4 from the Government of Canada. Amazing. Look around. What do you have? We all have something. Jesus always starts with what we have. He doesn't ask us to do more than we can do, only to use what we already have, no matter how great or small. Everyone can do something. Give, pray, learn, or advocate. Give. Everyone has something. Time, money, or talent to add to the joint efforts to end hunger. Putting what we have in God's hands and following instructions multiplies our offerings more than we could ever imagine. Pray. Every time you hear news of conflict, of war, and climate disasters, when you hear that food prices are rising due to COVID-19 or that poverty is rising, remember that it means people are going hungry. Pray for recovery for refugees and people living through drought and through conflict. Learn. The more you understand, the better you'll be able to respond to the reality of global hunger. As we learn, we inform others and invite them to learn too. Advocate. We all have a voice. We know that not everything that needs to be done to end world hunger can be done through the church. Just like the farmers who started Canadian Foodgrains Bank, express your concern about hunger in the world and ask that your values are reflected and represented in government policies and action. Moses, Esther, and other biblical figures are examples of advocates whom God used to make sure that those in power were aware of injustice. This resulted in saving many lives. Since the Foodgrains Bank started in 1983, our members have served millions of people by providing food during emergencies or supporting families' efforts to provide food for themselves. No one person, no one congregation or organization can do this on their own. It is putting what we have in God's hands and working together that so much is accomplished. So if you are wondering what you can really do about world hunger, simply look around, see what you have, put it in God's hands, and follow God's instructions. See how much will be accomplished with it.